Under the pale glow of the moon, a lone farm lay nestled between two sleepy hills. A thick fog rolled in from the valley, curling around the crooked fences and creeping towards the worn barn. It was a quiet night, but not for long. Across the way, shadows were stirring. A group of men dressed in dark clothes slipped through the tall grass, their footfalls muted by the damp earth. They were cautious, moving like phantoms, using the cover of darkness as their ally. But the first light of dawn was still hours away, and they had time to spare. Inside the farmhouse, Roger, a weary farmer with deep lines etched into his face, sat by the dying embers of a fire. The day had been long, filled with the sweet scent of hay and the distant calls of birds taking their last flights before bed. His hands, calloused and rough, rubbed over his stubbled chin. He had spent most of his life in this very place, working the land with his father, learning the rhythms of the earth. Yet something felt different that night. An unease settled in his gut, gnawing at him. Maybe it was the way the wind howled or how the animals seemed restless. The cows thudded against their wooden stalls, and the dog, old and loyal, growled softly in the corner, his ears perked up. Roger poured another cup of coffee, the steam swirling in the dim light. When the first sound broke through the silence, a low, muffled thud, Roger's instincts kicked in. He stood, heart racing, scanning the shadows outside the window. The slight creak of the front door had become a familiar noise over the years, but this was different. With every beat of his racing heart, the men outside drew closer. They moved like predators, eyes gleaming with a hunger for what they believed to be easy pickings. All their lives had been spent on the wrong side of the law. Why should this night be any different? But Roger was not a man to be preyed upon. He had seen tougher days than this. Memories flooded back to him. Watching the sunset after a long day, sharing a laugh with his family over dinner, feeling the satisfaction of hard work come to fruition. This was his land, and beneath the layers of dirt and sweat, it was also his pride. With a deep breath, Roger picked up the rusted shovel leaning against the wall. Its familiar weight felt right in his hands. He slipped out of the house, the cool night air hitting him like a slap. He moved silently through the shadows, the flickering porch light barely illuminating his path. The men had gathered near the barn, whispering like sinister apparitions. They were confident. They thought the dark would protect them. But they didn't realize that Roger wasn't just a farmer. He was a protector. His family's legacy rested on these fields, and he was prepared to defend it. One of the men, burly and towering, stepped forward. He swung a flashlight around, revealing the shapes of their partner's small-time crooks with big dreams. They were too busy sizing up the barn to notice Roger circling silently. A cold smile crept onto the farmer's face. With the shovel lifted high, Roger charged. The air crackled with tension, every heartbeat syncing with the pulse of the night. The rustling of grass announced his arrival, cutting through the men's chatter. Their heads turned in unison, eyes widening in shock. Roger roared, and with those words the fog lifted. The men, stunned into silence, stumbled back, gauging the massive figure charging at them. They had come in with fear in their hearts for a naive farmer, but they discovered something far different, a man fueled by rage and the will to protect. The burly leader composed himself first, narrowing his eyes. "You must be the old man," he taunted, trying to mask his unease with bravado. But Roger could see the cracks in their facade. Their bravado was a thin veil, and he was determined to shred it. "Old, maybe." He lunged forward, striking the ground with the shovel, the sound echoing like thunder. The men moved, a flurry of limbs and startled gasps. One threw a punch, swinging wildly in the dark. Roger ducked low, allowing instinct to guide him. The shovel swung around, catching the attacker just below the ribs. With a grunt, the man fell, winded. The others hesitated, their camaraderie faltering. They hadn't expected this. The old farmer was different than they thought. He was not merely a shadow in the night, but a force of nature, a tempest unleashed. Still armed with that rusty shovel, Roger advanced. Each swing was a mix of desperation and determination. Memories of his family flashed before him, the laughter of his children, the soft touch of his wife's hand, the quiet evenings spent together. He fought not just for the land, but for the life that had bloomed there. The remaining men huddled together, glancing at one another, their bravado slipping. They were no longer the hunters, they were prey. In that moment, they felt fear, something they hadn't felt in a long time. Roger shouted, his voice heavy with a mix of anger and resolve. Power in his voice echoed across the yard, blending with the rustling leaves, creating a symphony of the night against the backdrop of uncertainty. The burly leader, now visibly shaken, squared his shoulders and turned to his abandoned comrades. He shouted. The words pierced through the fog like the clearing sky. Hesitation turned to panic, and in an instant they were gone, slipping away into the cool night like steam evaporating into thin air. Roger watched, heart still pounding, as they disappeared into the shadows. It was over for now. The adrenaline pulsing through him began to fade. But as the dawn broke, spilling silver light across the fields, the weight of that night settled in. The danger had passed, but the reality lingered. He returned to the front porch, the shovel resting at his side, and for a moment he let the sunshine warm his face. Around him lay the remnants of what had just occurred, signs of struggle and fear, but also of bravery and defiance. The dog approached, placing his head gently against Roger's leg, offering a silent form of comfort. But in that brief stillness, something else emerged. Roger felt the strength of the land rising within him, a fierce determination to guard it at all costs. He knew life wouldn't be as simple anymore. He felt the pulse of responsibility thumping within him like the heart of the earth. As the sun climbed higher, illuminating the trail of shadows, he resolved to face whatever came next. And as the days continued to roll by, the farmer found strength not just in the shovel he wielded, but in the memories of laughter and love that built this land his land. For every sunset he had shared, every seed he had planted, they had laid roots deeper than he knew. Roger began to notice changes around him. Neighbors who had once kept their distance now came forward, offering solidarity, sharing stories of their own encounters. They had seen the gang, heard the rumors of their ruthlessness, and found the farmer's defense to be an ember of courage in their own lives. Together, they formed a network, a coalition of resilience forged in shared stories and battles fought in the night. It transformed his small farm into a sanctuary for all who felt threatened, a place where hope thrived amid adversity. And while Roger stood at the edge, gripping the same rusted shovel that now hung heavily by his side, he felt, for the first time in years, a flicker of peace through the chaos. It was not just a land under threat. It was a community united, and he had become more than just a protector, he had become a leader. In the twilight of each day, as hues of orange and pink painted the sky, Roger would gather everyone around the barn. They would sit, share stories, and laugh, feeding off the warmth of their togetherness. The struggle had aged him, but in that aging came wisdom. He understood now that real strength wasn't just in defiance, but in unity. All because he moved first, because he refused to let fear dictate the narrative. And as darkness fell each evening, no longer an omen of dread, but a protective cloak, Roger would look out across the fields and feel a deep sense of gratitude. He had not only protected the land, but had sown the seeds of resilience in the hearts of many. Days turned to months and the seasons changed, but the bond formed under the stars remained unshakable. That once lonely farm, nestled between two hills, became a beacon, a reminder that even the smallest of voices, when fueled by conviction and love, can rise up against the lurking shadows of chaos. In the stillness of night, whenever the winds whispered through the fields, Roger would stand tall, grounded not only in the earth but in something far greater, an unyielding spirit that inspired hope against all odds. The moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the quiet fields of Green Valley. A light fog rolled through the rows of corn, wrapping the landscape in a cloak of silence. Somewhere in the distance, a lone owl hooted, its haunting call echoing through the night. Inside a modest farmhouse, Tom, a farmer with hands hardened by years of toil, sat alone by his fire. He tried to shake off the unease that had settled in the pit of his stomach. All day, a gnawing feeling had clung to him, as persistent as the chill in the air. The cattle were restless and the dogs wouldn't stop barking. Something was brewing. Without warning, the quietude shattered. Outside, a rustling noise met Tom's ears, a low whisper of movement that stirred his instincts. He rose slowly, heart thudding, and peered through the dusty window. The shadows were deep and menacing, but it was the shape of dark figures creeping towards his property that jolted him. A gang, dressed in black, moved like ghosts among the crops, their intentions as murky as the night itself. Tom's throat tightened. They were terrible news, trouble wrapped in secrecy, the kind of trouble that could steal everything he had built. But there was something else rising within him, an unwavering resolve. He would not let them take his land. He grabbed a flashlight and made his way to the back door. Each step felt heavy, each breath a reminder of the fear that wrapped around him like ivy. But it wasn't fear that propelled him. It was the fierce love for his family, for this land, that drove him forward. Tom swung open the door and stepped into the night, his breath visible in the cool air. The fog enveloped him, but he pressed on toward the barn where he had spent countless nights working alongside his father. He needed a plan. Stealthily, he made his way toward the nearest tree, crouching low. The moonlight caught the edges of a figure, a man with a bandana covering his face, scanning the area. Tom's heart raced. With practiced precision, he steadied the flashlight, the beam cutting through the fog like a sword slicing the gloom. He shouted, voice booming in the silence. The gang froze, their eyes wide, caught off guard. The man called back, his bravado wavering. "I want you to leave," Tom replied, stepping into the light. He squared his shoulders, his presence growing larger than life. The gang shifted uneasily, exchanging glances. They had expected an easy mark, perhaps an old man too tired to fight back. Instead, they found a defiant figure, rooted deep in the soil of his land, unwilling to back down. Another thug sneered, but Tom's unwavering glare silenced him. In that moment, memories flooded Tom's mind, his father teaching him to plant seeds in spring, how to bring them to life through hard work and diligence. It was not merely land. It was his legacy, a piece of history forged by generations of labor. As tension thickened in the air, Tom could sense the gang's hesitation. "You don't want to do this," he said slowly, carefully choosing his words. The leader of the gang stepped forward, bravado on full display, but even he faltered momentarily, as if the weight of Tom's stare bore down upon him. Silence stretched between them, heavy like a storm cloud. Then, as if on cue, the dogs erupted into a frenzy, barking and growling from the safety of the porch. The sheer noise sent a shiver down the spines of the intruders, and Tom seized the moment. "Leave my property." He bellowed, raising the flashlight as if it were a weapon. The beam flickered, reflecting off the men's stunned faces. One of them, a wiry figure with tattoo snakes twisting up his arms, took a step back, eyes darting nervously. "Maybe we should go, man," he muttered, his voice dripping with uncertainty. The leader glared at him, torn between pride and self-preservation. He demanded, but doubt seeped into his words. Tom took a step closer, determination reflected in his eyes. "I've fought tooth and nail to keep this land. You think you walk in here and I'll just let you take it?" His voice was steady, ricocheted with an authority that echoed through the fog-shrouded night. The men glanced at one another, their bravado fading. They had heard tales of how farmers like Tom were willing to fight for their land, stories that had been passed down like folklore. But one gang member, emboldened by the fearlessness of his leader, suddenly lunged forward, determined to assert dominance. With a quick flick of his wrist, he pulled a crowbar from his belt. The tool glinted menacingly in the dim light, and the change in the air was palpable. Tom felt a rush of adrenaline surge through him as he instinctively raised the flashlight higher, the weight of years of hard work behind it. The tension escalated, the air thickened, pushing on everyone's lungs. The gang huddled together, whispering, their earlier bravado all but vanished. Tom stood firm, heart pounding, prepared to defend not only his land but also the very essence of who he was. Someone urged, their voice laced with panic, but the leader, still unwilling to back down completely, hesitated. "No, this is our chance," he stammered. Suddenly, a sound cut through their exchange, a low, thunderous growl. The dogs on the porch charged forward, senses on high alert, barking ferociously, ready to protect their territory. The gang recoiled, uncertain, as the pack lunged into the fray. Tom didn't wait for them to regroup. With a burst of adrenaline, he charged forward, shovel in hand, swinging it with a weighty determination that felt right. The rusty steel caught the moonlight just as the first attacker stumbled back, tripped over his own feet. The darkness erupted into chaos. Tom felt alive, his blood pumping with purpose as he faced the men with every intention to defend what was his. Pushing through the tension, he swung again, narrowly missing another thug who barely ducked in time. "Get out," he roared, propelled by an unyielding spirit. That land had seen life, laughter, and struggle. It had soaked in the sweat and tears of generations, and it would not let this gang lay waste to it. The gang's confidence crumbled like dry earth. Panic spread among them like wildfire, and one by one, they began to retreat, stumbling over each other as they scrambled to escape Tom's wrath. Was it his size? Was it the ferocity of his conviction? Or maybe it was the conviction he instilled in himself to defend what was right against the chaos spiraling around them. As the last thug turned and ran, Tom saw the fear etched across his face, and he felt something begin to settle deep within him: satisfaction, relief, and an undeniable connection to his land. His breath came in ragged gasps as he watched their forms dissolve into the dark, leaving behind a stillness that was almost surreal. Moments passed before he turned back towards the farmhouse. The dogs had quieted, sensing the threat was gone. The air felt different now, the weight of the night lifting as the first hints of dawn began to kiss the horizon. Tom was still shaking, but he forced himself to take a deep breath and look around. His fields, untouched, still held the promise of another day. Among them lay the remnants of his heart, each seed sown, every root nurtured, held in trust for the future. As the sun began to rise, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Tom made his way back to the porch. He sank down heavily into an old chair. The fight may have drained him, but his resolve felt stronger than ever. That night had awakened a fire within him, a fierce belief in his right to fight for his home, his land, and his family. He knew then that the battle wouldn't end with a single clash. There would be other threats, perhaps not today, perhaps not tomorrow, but they would come, and he would be ready. Days turned into weeks, and the story of that night rippled through Green Valley. Word spread about the fearless farmer who stood alone, face to face with trouble. Neighbors began to show up unannounced, bringing food, checking on his fields, refusing to let him stand alone any longer. Tom was no longer just a farmer. He had become a symbol of resilience, an emblem of unity in a town that had seen its share of hardships. And each gathering on his porch told a tale of community, strength, and support in the face of uncertainty. The gang that had once slipped in quietly found themselves haunted by the spirit of the land. They tried to return, to slip in unnoticed, but each time they did, they found the warmth of community standing between them and what they desired. Tom didn't just fend off danger that night. He ignited a spark in the hearts of the people around him. It wasn't just about land anymore. It was about the bonds formed in the hearth of struggle. With every sunset, they gathered to share stories, laughter rising like the stars above. Every visit to the farm brought strength, laughter, and resilience, but also greater determination to protect their own. As Tom looked out at the sprawling fields under a setting sun, he realized that it was more than the land he had defended. It was a deeper connection, one that grew alongside the crops he nurtured, entwined with the stories of everyone who had come together. In the face of adversity, they had found their true selves. And for Tom, standing tall in the twilight glow, he knew it was never just about fighting. It was about growing together, standing together, and reigniting hope within each other. The shadows that had once crept in slowly were banished by the unity of a small town, emerging brighter than the dawn itself. He had seen the darkness, but he had also felt the warmth of community, rising like a new day ready to conquer whatever lay ahead. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden hue over the fields of Oak Ridge. Crops swayed gently in the evening breeze, the sweet smell of earth and growth enveloping the area like an old friend. But that serenity was shattered as a low hum grew louder, a series of dark shapes creeping into view along the tree line. A gang, dressed in black, moved like shadows against the dusk. Their footsteps were silent, purposeful. They arrived as if summoned by the growing darkness, eyes gleaming with a glint that spoke of trouble. In their minds, this was just another day in an endless cycle of petty crime, a plan just waiting to unfurl. But at the old farmhouse, nestled at the center of it all, a different story was brewing. Jim, a farmer shaped by years of long, hard days under the sun, was finishing his dinner when an instinct warned him something wasn't right. There was always a sense of peace here, a harmony with the land that fostered a deep connection between Jim and his work. Tonight, that harmony was disrupted. He stood up, wiping his hands on a rag, the clatter of cutlery fading into silence as he scanned the horizon. From his worn window, he could just make out the shapes shifting among those trees. Their movements were erratic, but there was a purpose behind them. Something churned in Jim's gut, a mix of curiosity and dread. The wind rustled through the corn, a haunting whisper calling out to him. Jim stepped outside, the cool air stinging at his face. He squinted into the approaching darkness, trying to make sense of the shadowy figures. As he drew closer to the barn, he felt a whirlwind of emotions: fear, protectiveness, a fiery determination igniting deep within him. He knew the risks of living out here, far from the protection of the town, a place where temptation could twist good intentions into darkness. But the thought of a group encroaching on his sanctuary lit a fire in his belly. This was not just land to him, it was home, woven with memories of laughter, tears, and generations of sweat. As he reached the barn, he couldn't ignore the sounds surrounding him. Murmurs echoed between the trees, words spilling like secrets. The gang had gathered now, an unholy circle cloaked in confidence, each member relishing their invisible power. They operated on the assumption that strength could intimidate, that fear was a useful weapon. But Jim was no ordinary farmer. He had spent years wrestling the unforgiving earth. He understood hard work, the weight of responsibility. He understood what it meant to protect something with all your heart. And as he crouched behind the barn, heart racing, he realized he had to move first. Adrenaline surged through him, igniting his senses. He could hear their laughter now, sharp and taunting, echoing through the fields. Resolved, Jim reached for a shovel propped against the barn wall, its rugged handle familiar against his calloused palm. This wouldn't be a weapon for violence, but a tool, a statement, one that declared he refused to be a victim. Stepping out from the shadows, he let the moonlight reflect off his sturdy frame, towering against the backdrop of darkness. Shouted, his voice steady, not wavering despite the surge of fear inside him. The gang spun around, caught off guard. Their expressions morphed from playful arrogance to puzzled disbelief. They had expected an easy mark, not an indignant farmer standing firm for what he believed in. Barked the leader, a scrappy figure with a bandana pulled tight against his face. "I'll tell you what's none of my business," Jim replied, gripping the shovel tighter. "It's you creeping onto my land like a snake in the grass." The gang exchanged glances, uncertainty creeping into their eyes. They had hoped to intimidate, to scatter fear. But here stood a man who wouldn't budge. The energy crackled in the air around them. Every heartbeat felt amplified in that moment. The leader sneered, a mix of bravado and bravado. "What are you going to do?" A flicker of doubt hung in the air, and Jim seized on it. "Maybe you haven't heard," he called back, his voice cutting through the tension. "I'm not just a farmer. I'm a guardian of every seed I've planted, every meal I've nurtured." The words fell like rain on parched ground. With each syllable, a fierce energy swelled within him. The gang hesitated, some shifting uneasily, torn between violence and the whispers of retreat. "Listen up," Jim continued, the fire behind his words pulsing. "You can walk away right now, or you can risk everything." In that moment, Jim was no longer just a farmer facing a gang. He was a warrior for his legacy, for the love that tied him to this place. Doubling down, he took a step forward, raising the shovel menacingly. The surprise was palpable, and doubt flickered among their ranks. Jim shouted again, his voice rising over the night. The gang leader, struggling to maintain face in front of his comrades, barked an order. "We're not backing down." Something had shifted. The air felt charged as lingering fear coursed through the gang like a shudder. And just when they seemed poised to charge, the first crack in their confidence emerged. From his porch, Jim's loyal dog Sam barked fiercely, adding to the chaos. The men faltered, glancing back toward the sound. Recognizing they were outnumbered by not only a fierce adversary but an impenetrable bond of family and loyalty, their resolve weakened. "Let's go," whispered one, backing away, eyes wide with paranoia. The leader insisted, but his voice lacked the conviction it had held moments before. As the gang's front line wavered, Jim steeled himself against the uncertainty. He commanded. In an instant, all the bravado melted away. The leader's earlier threats turned into words of a different kind. Fear began to seep through their ranks as the reality of their situation crystallized. They were not the hunters here, they were cornered mice. As they shuffled back, unsure and frantic, the sound of their retreat echoed across the fields, a chorus of cowardice fading into the encroaching night. Jim lowered the shovel slowly, heart pounding. "Leave and don't come back," he called out, watching the figures dissolve into the shadows, leaving behind a quiet like none he had known. The weight of what had just happened sank in, the adrenaline crashing against his senses like a wave. In the stillness that followed, Jim felt both exhausted and invigorated, the heart of the land echoing in his chest. It wasn't just that he had defended his home, he had reclaimed the power to stand against adversity. As dawn broke, washing the fields in breathtaking light, the reality of the earlier confrontation settled into something profound. The world was waking up, and so was Jim's resolve. In this cycle of sun and shadow, he found himself changed stronger, braver, and filled with gratitude for the land that had given him so much. With every passing day, whispers of the gang's hasty retreat spread through Oak Ridge. That local legend sprang to life, a farmer who stood tall against a gang and won. People began stopping by, neighbors he barely knew approaching him with stories of their own struggles, their own fears. They'd seen something that night, not just a man standing in the dark, but a spirit of resilience igniting a community. Together, they rallied around Jim, uniting in a bond forged from shared belief and common respect, a pledge to protect each other and the land they loved. In those evenings that followed, laughter filled the air as townsfolk gathered at the farmhouse, stories exchanged like currency. The kids played in the fields, while adults bonded over tales of victory and hardship. Each laughter, each joyful shout reverberated against the backdrop of courage that now defined Oak Ridge. And with every sunset, Jim felt the warmth of his legacy growing. He wasn't just fighting for himself. He was part of something bigger, a community ready to face any storm. Weeks turned into months, and as seasons shifted, the echoes of fear transformed into anticipation. Together, they farmed, shared, thrived. They faced the harvests of life not as isolated individuals, but as a family connected by a common goal: safety, security, and the freedom to nurture their dreams. But lurking in the shadows was that lingering threat. Despite their newfound strength, Jim knew the gang might come back. And if they did, he would be ready. He trained himself, not just with a shovel, but with the heart and soul of a community that had his back. He built connections with everyone, reinforcing the idea that safety was not just a personal affair, it was a communal shield. The night of the annual Harvest Festival arrived, a celebration of everything they had fought for and built together. Under the glowing string lights, laughter spilled into the night as families danced and enjoyed the bounty of the land. This year felt different, electric, charged with purpose and community spirit. But as the laughter peaked and joy reached its zenith, a figure emerged at the edge of the celebration, a familiar face tinged with regret and desperation. It was the tattooed man from the gang. Guilt washed over him like waves crashing against the shore. He was alone, eyes darting nervously, clutching a worn-out hoodie. Gone was the bravado. Instead, a broken spirit sought redemption. Jim spotted him, heart racing. The fear mingled with a deep sense of empathy. He approached cautiously, understanding the weight of choices made. Jim asked, voice steady yet inviting. The man hesitated, then stepped forward, raw honesty shining through his uncertainty. I'm sorry for what I did. We didn't mean to cross the line that night. I've lost everything." In that instant, Jim saw not just a former threat, but a human being seeking a path back to redemption. It was a complex moment, a fragile thread connecting a troubled past to a hopeful future. "Everyone deserves a second chance," Jim replied, his voice holding steadiness, just as the land beneath his feet had supported him all along. "But it takes courage to stand up and choose a better path. This community is stronger than fear." The man's eyes widened at that invitation, hope fighting against the shadows. The music played on as Jim guided him back to the heart of the festival, where laughter welcomed every stranger, where true strength flourished not just in defiance but also in forgiveness. And as the sun fell low in the sky, a gathering of souls unified against adversity, each change in the air a reminder of the beauty that emerges when communities stand together. That night, amid the stars, Jim realized this journey was never solely about the fields or fighting off a gang. It was about weaving connections that breathed life into the soil and hearts of everyone around him. Together, they forged a story of resilience, courage, and undying hope, an enduring legacy that shone brighter than the moon above. With every step Jim took in the fields, he felt the pulse of their collective spirit, growing stronger with each passing day. And as he looked out over the horizon, he knew that whatever shadow tried to creep in, he and his community would face it together. On a dusky autumn evening, the sun dipped low behind the hills, casting long shadows across the vast cornfields of the Smith family farm. A cool breeze swept through the rows, rustling the leaves and carrying with it an air of impending change. Above, the sky darkened, and as it did, shadows began to shift among the trees lining the property, dark shapes creeping closer, moving like phantoms through the dim light. Inside the weathered farmhouse, old Hank Smith studied the horizon, his brow furrowing as he noticed the figures slinking toward the barn. The warmth of the kitchen felt distant as a chill raced up his spine. Until that moment, he had been savoring the last sips of his coffee, oblivious to the shifting atmosphere around him. But now, his instincts kicked in a primal alertness that only years of hard living could instill. "Something's not right," he murmured, setting his cup down with a sense of urgency. The wind howled outside and the dogs began to bark wildly, their growls echoing like alarms in the darkening night. Hank had worked this land for decades, had poured his sweat and soul into every inch of it, and he knew every noise, every rustle of the wind. But this was different. This felt like an invasion. He turned and rushed to the door, the creaky wood echoing as it swung wide. The farm was quiet now, an unnatural stillness washing over everything except for the distant whispers growing louder, an exchange of voices somewhere on the edge of his property. With each step forward, the crunch of gravel under his boots felt like a countdown. Hidden behind the barn, a group of men gathered, hooded figures casting furtive glances at one another, their murmured plots just out of earshot. They were there for something, and their intention was clear. This gang, rumored to be trouble in the area, had snaked into town slowly, like smoke creeping through the walls. But tonight, Hank would not let them slip through unnoticed. Hank shouted, his voice cutting through the air with a fierce authority. The gang froze, turning to face him, surprise painting their faces. The leader, a tall man with a jagged scar running down his cheek, stepped forward, arrogance flashing in his eyes. "Just passing through, old man. We're looking for a little fun," he sneered, pulling back the hood to reveal a smirk that dripped with malice. "Fun." Hank's sharp tone silenced the gang's laughter, his very presence commanding the space around him. "You're trespassing on my property." There was something primal in Hank's stance. Years of hard-fought battles against nature and time had etched strength into his every nerve. He wasn't just a farmer. He was the last line of defense against the chaos that threatened to disrupt everything he had built. The gang hesitated, glancing between each other, caught between bravado and the palpable tension crackling in the air. Hank stood firm, unyielding, every muscle in his body primed to protect what was his. The leader mocked, taking another step forward. Hank tightened his grip on the shovel he had grabbed from behind the barn. Its handle felt smooth against his weathered hands, a tool of labor turned weapon of choice. "It's not about the shovel," he replied, the weight of his years resonating in his voice. "It's about the years I've spent pouring myself into this land." The gang shuffled uncomfortably, the bravado slipping with every heartbeat. They had expected an easy mark, but this farmer was different. His fierce gaze bore into them, igniting an unspoken fear that churned in their gut. "Let's get out of here," whispered one of the flunkies, his bravado faltering. But the leader dismissed him with a wave of hand, unwilling to listen to reason. They were the predators, weren't they? They thrived on chaos and fear. "We're just getting started," he hissed. Hank wasn't about to back down. Years of hard work had cultivated not just the land but a spirit that wouldn't be easily extinguished. You're mistaken if you think terror brings power. There's strength in standing up for what's right. With that, he swung the shovel forward with a practiced motion, planting it in the ground between them like a metaphorical line in the sand. Tension snapped, and the fear that had flickered in the gang's eyes transformed into confusion and doubt. It was in that moment of hesitation that Hank made his move. He charged forward, shovel raised high, an embodiment of determination. The gang scattered, realizing they weren't facing a simple farmer but a man fueled by rage and love for his land. They stumbled backward, instincts kicking in as they began to run, the bravado replaced by sheer panic. Hank shouted, his voice vibrant with authority. The last vestiges of threat evaporated as the gang fled, leaving nothing but the echoes of their rushing footsteps behind. Hank stood still, breathless, heart hammering in his chest. The weight of protection bore down upon him, but he was victorious. He had claimed his ground not just against the gang, but against the very fear that sought to invade his soul. He didn't just stand up to them. He shattered their illusion of power with raw determination. As the moon rose high overhead, lighting the fields with a silver glow, Hank felt an unexpected surge of energy. Slowly, he lowered the shovel, exhaling deeply, aware of the emptiness that filled the night now that the confrontation had passed. But he knew this wasn't the end. The gang would regroup, and the threat loomed larger now than before. As night stretched onward, Hank spent hours pacing the perimeter of his land, eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of return. The following days saw the whispers of the encounter ripple through the community. Word spread like wildfire. Hank Smith had stood firm against the gang. Neighbors turned up at his doorstep, bringing offers of support and camaraderie. They gathered on his porch, sharing stories and laughter in a newfound unity, finding strength in mutual respect. Slowly, Hank began to realize he wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was igniting a fire within the hearts of others, a recognition that standing up together could create a wall against threats. The sense of isolation peeled away, revealing a fabric of community interwoven by shared struggles. They held meetings on his porch under the twilight sky, planning to safeguard not just their own properties, but the life woven throughout their town. People shared their worries, their own encounters with the gang, and Hank listened, a leader reborn from the embers of that night's confrontation. Weeks passed, winter approached, and with it, the chilling winds carried whispers of discontent. Yet in the face of the encroaching cold, the community bound by Hank's bravery became unwavering, standing shoulder to shoulder as they prepared their defenses. Each person brought their own skill, their own story, creating a wholeness that extended far beyond the farm. But then one evening, as frost caked the fields, the gang reemerged. This time, they weren't slinking in from the trees. They arrived on vehicles, engines roaring like thunder, determined to claim what they believed was rightfully theirs. Hank stood at the front of his property, flanked by his neighbors, anxiety gripping his chest as he assessed the growing shadows. The gang was back, visibly angrier now, their numbers bolstered by the promise of intimidation and violence. "Stay calm," Hank whispered, reassuring the nervous neighbors beside him. The gang seized the moment, the leader climbing out of the truck with an air of defiance. He taunted, looking at the gathered crowd. But Hank stepped forward, unwavering, heart steady against the wind that whipped through the air. "You can't break us." The community stood behind him, a chorus of voices rising to match his strength. "You think you can just take what isn't yours?" The gang's bravado began to waver, and Hank seized that moment to rally his neighbors. "We are more than just survivors, we are family." As Hank spoke, the people behind him began to echo his words, a resonating affirmation of their collective bond against the threat. The presence of unity became a shield, a reminder that they were not alone. Hope surged like fire through their veins, igniting courage that stood strong against the roaring chaos. "Hank!" They began to chant, their voices rising like a tide. And in that moment, the gang faltered. The leader's arrogance cracked like fragile glass, revealing doubt beneath bravado. They had come seeking havoc, but were met with a swelling tide of defiance and solidarity. "Let's get out of here," the leader growled, looking back at the retreating figures of his gang, voices fading into the night. With that, they turned tail and fled, retreating into the shadows, the sound of their engines echoing now as their presence vanished from view. Cheers erupted among Hank's neighbors, each joyful shout a testament to unity. They had faced the darkness and emerged victorious, a bond strengthened by a refusal to submit. As the frost began to thaw and spring approached, a new chapter unfolded for the community of Oak Ridge. Hank, once just a farmer, had become a beacon of hope, courage, and strength. Together, they cultivated more than crops. They nurtured resilience, camaraderie, and the knowledge that they could face storms, both literal and metaphorical, hand in hand. Every evening, as the sun set behind the hills, Hank found himself on his porch, surrounded by his neighbors, all sharing stories and laughter. Life flourished not just in the soil, but in the hearts of each person who had come together in these trying times. Hank knew that the essence of courage lay not just in the act of fighting back, but in the love that bonded them to this place. As he looked out over the fields, now blooming with life, he felt an overwhelming sense of fulfillment. It was a legacy worth protecting, built piece by piece, heart by heart, day by day. In an ever-changing world, they had faced the darkness and claimed their light, and Hank knew they were ready for anything that lay ahead. Together they would rise, no shadows creeping in to disrupt the life they had forged through unity, love, and unyielding strength. On a still night, as darkness blanketed the small farming community of Willow Creek, a tension hung in the air. Under the light of a half-moon, a group of men moved quietly among the cornfields, their figures shifting like shadows. They crept in slowly, stealthily, tools of chaos and destruction hiding behind a veneer of calm. Whispers floated between them, loud with bravado, while the earth fell silent, sensing what was approaching. Inside a weathered farmhouse, George Turner, a farmer whose hands were worn and calloused from years of labor, sat by the flickering light of an oil lamp. The rich smell of freshly baked bread filled the room, but his mind was elsewhere. He glanced at the front window, unease pooling in his stomach. Something felt off. For George, the farm was everything: a sanctuary, a legacy. This land had fed his family for generations, each seed sown woven into the fabric of his life. Suddenly, the familiar sounds of the evening frogs croaking and crickets chirping were replaced by an unsettling silence. Gripping the edge of the table, George's instincts kicked in. He stepped outside, the cool night air slapping his face. He muttered, half to himself. Clutching a lantern, he swept the light across the yard. That's when he saw them. Just beyond the reach of the farm's light, a group gathering by the edge of his property, dark figures whispering and plotting like snakes in the grass. Fear gripped at his heart, but George shook it off. Fear wouldn't dictate his life. He had weathered storms before, both literal and metaphorical. This wasn't just a home, it was a fortress, a battleground for everything he held dear. He set the lantern down, grounding himself in the familiar rhythm of the earth beneath his feet. The sound of his pulse thundered in his ears. He had seen gang activity creep into nearby towns, stories echoing through whispered conversations, like warnings carried on the breeze. As danger approached, he felt the strength of a man who knew he had to act first. With a determined stride, he moved toward the barn, grabbing an old shovel that leaned against the wall. In his years of working this land, it had become a trusty companion. It embodied his labor, his sweat, and perhaps now his defense. The gang hadn't noticed him yet, fueled by their own bravado as they plotted. "This place is ripe for the taking," one of them sneered, glancing toward the flickering light of the farmhouse. "Nobody's gonna stand up to us." But George had heard enough. He stepped into the open, lantern in hand, casting light on the dark intentions. "You're on my land," he shouted, his voice full of authority. The gang turned, surprise painted across their faces. Their confidence fell like a house of cards, retreating for just a moment. The leader, a burly figure with a chipped tooth, narrowed his eyes. He challenged, but doubt lurked beneath the bravado. "This land is my life," George replied, his grip tightening around the shovel. It was more than just words. Every hardship he had faced on that land coursed through him. Each crop that struggled upwards against the harsh sun had taught him the beauty of resilience. An electric silence hung in the air. The gang members exchanged glances, uncertainty creeping in like a fog. They had come anticipating weakness, easily finding a target in the lone farmer. But George wasn't just a farmer, he was a protector, fierce and unwavering. "Let's show this punk what we're made of," the leader barked, his confidence bolstered by frustration. The words raced through the gang. Those who had come sweeping in with an air of intimidation now understood they weren't meeting a simple man. As they advanced, George took a step back, readying himself. "I don't want to hurt you," he said, voice steady but firm. Just as chaos loomed, George caught movement in the periphery of his vision. The barn door creaked open behind him, and out stepped his trusty dog, Max, barking fiercely, shoulders tensed with resolve. The gang faltered again, uncertainty washing over them like cold water. Max seemed to growl in dog language, the fearsome protector making his presence known. It was a reminder that George wasn't alone, and that this farm was protected not just by him but by every spirit that had walked its fields. In that moment something shifted. The gang paused, glancing uneasily at one another. George seized the opportunity, raising the shovel high. And just like that, fear began to take root where there had once been bravado. They were supposed to be the nightmare that haunted this town, but they were met with the fierce truth of a man defending his legacy. "What's it going to be? You're outnumbered here," George shouted. The leader faltered, his earlier courage waning. "This isn't over," he spat, backing up slowly, and with that the gang retreated one by one. They turned and fled into the shadows, leaving only echoes of their retreat behind. George stood firm, chest heaving, the shovel still in hand. As the silence once again enveloped him, he felt the stakes of the night victory and relief washing over him. Yet he knew better, that this might only be the beginning. Days turned into weeks, and whispers of the gang's failed attempt to invade George's property grew louder. Stories spread, painting him as a local hero, the man who stood firm where others chose to cower. Neighbors began showing up at his farm more often, bringing freshly baked goods and hearty meals, eager to connect and support the man who had taken a stance. In his heart, George felt gratitude bloom. The farm had always been a sanctuary for him, and now it seemed it was becoming a sanctuary for others as well. They gathered for barbecues, swapping stories of resilience and hardship, sharing laughter that echoed across the fields. But in the stillness of the night, when the air grew heavy with uncertainty, George felt the gnawing doubt that maybe the gang would come back. Maybe they would regroup and strike harder. It kept him alert, propelled him to prepare, and with renewed intensity he became a guardian of his land. He began to rally the community. Men, women, and even teenagers showed up with a purpose. The once quiet fellowship began to transform into a unified force, fortifying fences, ensuring every inch of land had eyes to watch over it. Together, they painted warning signs, their act a testament to their collective determination. One chilly evening, gathered around a campfire, George felt the warmth of camaraderie surrounding him. They shared dreams and aspirations for their town, everyone expressing their hopes for a future free from fear. It was there in that circle, illuminated by dancing flames, that George realized they weren't just defending his land anymore. They were standing up for each other. But as winter approached, with icy winds biting through the town, buzz started to drift through the streets. Whispers of the gang resurfaced, but this time, they didn't slink back quietly. They openly threatened people, claiming that they would take what they believed was theirs. And one cold night it happened. George was finishing up chores when the echoes of a revving engine pierced through the stillness. Heart racing, he stepped outside, greeted by the unwelcome sight of their vehicles pulling up, dark figures spilling out. Gone were the moments of uncertainty. They came with darkness behind their eyes, armed with their intent. George shouted, instinctively positioning himself between the approaching gang and his gathered friends. They came to a halt, surprise flashing across their faces at the sight of a united community standing behind one man. The gang leader yelled, swaggering forward, "You think you can just defend it?" George's heart beat stronger. "You think you can shake us? You don't scare us." The air thickened, a palpable energy swirling as the gang pressed forward, attempting intimidation. But it was different now. Behind George stood a fortress of support. He wasn't alone. They were all ready to fight for their homes, shouted one of the gang members, lunging forward. But before he could move, Max charged, barking fiercely, a barrier of loyalty and loyalty that made the gang stumble. George shouted, raising his shovel defiantly, but it wasn't just the shovel or his voice that held them at bay. It was the sheer will of everyone gathered. The community behind him felt like a wall, solid, resilient, unwavering. George shouted, voice ringing with purpose, "And we will fight to keep it." In that moment, faith fused with strength. Hank's words echoed loudly, and together they roared back at the gang, pushing despair into the night. And then came the vital turning point. Instead of recoiling, the community surged forward, united against chaos, alive with courage and fire. They closed in around George, forming a barrier forged from hope and determination. The gang sensed the tide turning, uncertainty creeping back into their eyes as they shouted insults but backed away, stumbling back toward their vehicles. The power they thought they held evaporated like a mirage, replaced by folks armed not with weapons but with the strength of their bonds. "Get out!" George yelled, voice like thunder, each word charged with the unity they had forged. And with that last enforcement, the gang turned, retreating into the night faster than the wind, their confidence wheel-turned and shattered. As silence filled the air again, that quiet feeling transformed into ecstatic relief, a palpable joy that bubbled through the community. They had faced the dark together and emerged into the light, hearts soaring. Underneath the silver moon, George felt overwhelming gratitude. It wasn't just victory, it was a life reclaimed, friendships forged in fire, and a community that finally understood the value of standing for each other. Weeks turned into seasons, and as spring returned, it brought not just warmth but abundance. The town had blossomed into a place of unity. Neighbors collaborated, shared crops, and the laughter of children wafted through the fields. They built more than fences, they built trust. They held nights of storytelling and sharing, reaffirming the bonds strung across the land. George felt that even now, as tension ebbed, the spirit they had cultivated together would remain their strongest defense. One day, as he stood overlooking the vibrant green fields, with the sun warming his back, he knew they had sewn a tapestry of resilience that could face anything. Together, they had transformed fear into strength, and their community thrived against all odds. This was more than just land. It was home, alive with memories and love. And as the sun dipped behind the horizon that evening, George stood hand in hand with those who had become family, knowing that whatever shadows dared to creep in again, they would not face them alone. In unity, they had discovered their truth, and with it, a legacy worth protecting. The sun hung low in the sky, bathing the fields of Cedar Valley in a warm, golden glow. Hank, a rugged farmer with years etched into the lines of his face, wiped the sweat from his brow as he stepped back from the fence he was repairing. He surveyed his land, a patchwork of crops swaying gently in the evening breeze, the fruits of his labor standing tall against the approaching dusk. But as the sun dipped lower, shadows began to creep from the tree line at the edge of his property. Hank squinted, confusion knitting his brow. He had been running this farm for over 20 years, and there was something unnatural about the way those dark figures moved, low to the ground like predators stalking prey. The quiet hum of the evening was shattered as a flock of birds suddenly took to the skies, their frantic flutter sending a wave of unease through Hank's chest. As he stepped forward, his heart began to race. Familiar senses sharpened, instincts honed by years of hard work kicked in. Something was off. He strained to hear the faintest sound, the harsh whispers barely reaching his ears, but they were enough. A gang had settled on the outskirts of his land, trouble creeping in slowly like smoke billowing from a distant fire. With furrowed brows and a pulse quickening, Hank darted back toward the farmhouse. He grabbed the old rifle that hung by the door, its weight of comfort in his hands. Holding it firmly, he stepped out onto the porch, letting the dim light from the bulb above spill out onto the shadows. He called boldly, his voice strong against the fading light. The figures froze momentarily, startled by his presence. One of them shouted back, a sneer tugging at his lips. Hank countered, heart pounding in his chest. The gang leader, a scruffy man with a bandana wrapped around his neck, stepped forward. "We ain't looking for trouble, old man." Hank's eyes narrowed as he stepped down from the porch, gripping the rifle tightly. "All I want is for you to leave." Each word dripped with the weight of the years he had fought to cultivate and protect this space. As the gang exchanged glances, Hank could sense their hesitation. Yes, they may have come with bravado, emboldened by their numbers, but here he stood one man, strong and unyielding against the tide of their threats. The shadows danced around him, flickering like firelight, but something in their faces hinted at doubt. "Old man, you might want to rethink your tone," the leader shot back, trying to sound confident. But his voice wavered ever so slightly, revealing the cracks in their facade. "Maybe you don't know who you're dealing with either," Hank replied, stepping closer, resolve hardening like steel. "You think you can just stroll in and take whatever you want?" The silence stretched, thick with the tension of unspoken threats. Darkness crept in around them and the air felt electric. The gang saw the fierceness in Hank's eyes, a man willing to defend his home against anything. Suddenly, the sound of barking erupted from the shadows, a low growl that turned into a fierce chorus of barks. Max, Hank's loyal dog, charged from behind the porch, fur bristling with protective instinct. The gang visibly flinched, uncertainty dancing in their eyes again as Max found his place at Hank's side, clearly ready to defend his territory. "This is your last chance," Hank said, taking another step forward. Fear danced behind the bravado in their eyes, and before anyone could make a move, Hank raised his rifle slightly, enough to show he meant business. The gang leader glanced back at his comrades, seeing their unease. Decisions hung in the air, tangible and full of weight. They thought they were the predators, but here stood a farmer, ready to defend his own. The leader held his ground for a moment longer, visibly wrestling with pride versus self-preservation. Hank stood unwavering, the embodiment of determination. And in that moment, everything changed. And they began to retreat, stumbling through the trees and shadows, stumbling back toward the fading light, leaving the words hanging in the air like mist. Devastated yet victorious, Hank lowered his rifle as the tension melted away, the adrenaline coursing through him. Max barked triumphantly, the sound echoing off the walls of the night. The threat had retreated, but for how long? As dawn broke the next day, Hank stood outside, the sunlight washing over him like a warm blanket. Neighbors began to trickle in, curious about the commotion from the night before. One by one, they shared stories of their own brushes with danger, each tale adding weight to the atmosphere. They had created a tapestry woven with shared courage and empathy. One neighbor asked, shaking his head, "Those men don't fear anyone." "I couldn't let them take what I've worked for," Hank replied with a breath of honor and pride. "We worked our lives to build this place." And as the days stretched into weeks, the community gathered more fervently. They held meetings in the evenings, discussing ways to fortify the town against the looming threat. Something magical was brewing among them, not just strength in numbers, but a bond of resilience, fortified by shared struggles. Together, they began to reinforce fences, gather supplies, and share stories. Every act planted a deeper root of unity. They laid plans to defend their way of life, and Hank found himself not just as a farmer but as a beacon of hope within the community. But the gang wasn't done. One cold evening, late in the winter, a chill swept through the air, dense with foreboding. A low rumble echoed down the road, and Hank sensed it before he saw it. The gang returned, and they were more organized, coming with torches and shouts, a direct challenge that echoed through the fields. The leader bellowed, confidence rekindled in the glow of the torches they wielded. Hank felt steam rise within him, the fiery resolve he'd ignited within the community swelling in his chest. They had faced fear before, and they could do it again. The townsfolk gathered behind him, their faces steeled with determination against the gathering storm. Hank shot back, rising to the challenge. He raised his rifle again, a symbol of defiance against the approaching chaos. As the gang approached, a ripple of courage ignited among them. Hank's neighbors locked arms, forming a formidable barrier against the storm threatening to sweep through their lives. "Leave now or face the consequences," Hank warned, voice steady yet powerful, echoing through the night. The leader faltered for a moment, realizing the strength that Hank had rallied against him. This band of farmers, bonded in resilience, stood united in an unyielding wall against the darkness they had faced. Someone from the crowd shouted, a reminder that they were not one but many, each ready to bear the weight of their home. Suddenly, the tension snapped. The gang hesitated, glancing back at the intensity in Hank's eyes, the fire lit within the hearts of those standing shoulder to shoulder behind him. Swallowing their pride, the gang began to retreat, stumbling backward into the shadows they had come from. And as they retreated, cheering erupted from Hank's community, jubilation bubbling over like an overflow of passion. They had reclaimed not just the night, but every ounce of bravery that lay within them. The seasons shifted, but the bond forged on that cold winter night remained unshakable. The town flourished as a vibrant community, where neighbors became family, and laughter echoed through the fields they all tended together. Every dawn became a celebration of resilience, growing from the roots they had planted side by side, a legacy of strength that no gang could rip away. As time passed, the stories of that night transformed. What had been a fear-driven confrontation became a tale of unity, a lesson etched in the marrow of their being, the reminder that no one stands alone. Years later, on a clear autumn evening, the sun hung low over Cedar Valley, painting the sky in oranges and pinks. Hank stood by the fence, watching children running and playing amongst the crops. Each laughter, every shout was a link in the chain of all they had fought for. George's heart swelled with gratitude as he glanced at the community that had supported him through the darkest days. What began as a struggle to protect his land had evolved into a powerful testament to the strength of belonging, love, and unity. And as the sun set that evening, painting a masterpiece against the horizon, he knew that they had nurtured something so much greater than just crops on the land. In the fight against adversity, they had discovered hope, courage, and the essence of what it meant to be truly alive. Together, they had transformed fear into strength, and the legacy they created was one that would ripple through generations to come, forever a reminder that when the shadows creep in, a united front can shine brighter, breaking through the darkness together. Under the cloak of twilight, the silence in Pine Hollow was heavy, almost tangible. A vast expanse of field sprawled out in every direction, stretching towards the horizon, a patchwork of green and gold where nature had laid a feast for generations. But beneath the surface of that serenity lay an insidious threat. A gang crept in slowly, shadows slipping through the tall grass like whispers in the wind. Their footsteps were measured, their eyes scanning the expansive farmland. They were here for something, and they moved with a purpose. Inside the quaint farmhouse, Walter, a sturdy farmer built from years of hard work, wiped the sweat from his brow after a long day spent tilling the fields. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, and as he pushed the screen door open, a wave of unease washed over him. It wasn't just the sudden chill in the air. Something about the silence felt wrong. As he stepped outside, his gaze fell across the fields. Shadows were gathering, too thick and too deliberate. Heart pounding, Walter narrowed his eyes, scanning the tree line that marked the edge of his property. He had heard the stories of the gang that had been moving through neighboring towns, leaving chaos in their wake. No, not here, not on his land. The faint sound of laughter floated through the dusk, sinister and mocking as the gang gathered in low conversation. Walter clenched his fists, determination igniting within him. He had poured every ounce of his effort into this farm. It was more than just land. It was his legacy, a testament to his family's hard work and dedication. He wouldn't let them take it from him without a fight. He turned back inside, grabbing an old shovel from the corner of the barn. It was nothing fancy, but it was sturdy and familiar, an extension of himself. With the weight of the shovel in his hands, he felt a surge of courage. This was his land, and he would protect it. As he approached the gathering shadows, he called out, "Hey, you there!" His voice boomed through the night, echoing like thunder. The gang froze, turning to face him, surprise flickering across their faces. Walter could see their eyes wide with disbelief, as if they hadn't expected anyone to stand against them. One of them, a burly figure with tattoos snaking up his arms, stepped forward, trying to showcase a tough exterior. "Just having a look around, old man." Walter tightened his grip on the shovel, the metal glinting in the dim light. "This is private property, you need to leave." Laughter erupted from the gang, derisive and harsh. "What are you going to do about it?" The leader stepped closer, arrogance radiating from him. But beneath his bravado, Walter could see cracks forming. He could feel the fear lurking just beneath the surface. "I'll do whatever it takes to protect what's mine," Walter responded, his voice steady but laced with intensity. Memories of the fields he had tilled, the crops he had nurtured, flashed before his eyes. They had seen droughts and floods, but they had always prevailed, and he would do the same. The gang leader took another step forward, his bravado faltering. "You think you can scare us off? Then you should know better than to underestimate me," Walter said, locking eyes with the leader. The air was thick with tension, and for a moment time stood still. Then the unexpected happened. A sudden low growl erupted from the shadows. Rex, his loyal dog, charged forward from around the corner of the barn, fur bristling and teeth bared. The gang collectively flinched, their bravado dissipating as Rex took his place at Walter's side, a fierce guardian ready to defend its territory. "Back off," Walter growled, feeling the weight of his dog's fierce loyalty bolster his resolve. "You're not just dealing with me." Just then, a loud crash echoed through the air. The gang jerked into action as a heavy branch fell from a nearby tree, thudding onto the ground like a gunshot. In that brief moment of chaos, hesitation swirled among the gang like a thick fog. Walter seized the opportunity. He stepped forward again, raising the shovel high. "Leave." The gang leader hesitated, glancing back at his companions who were starting to back away, uncertainty clear on their faces. Walter didn't let up, stepping closer. "Go back to wherever you came from. You're outnumbered here," he warned, his heart racing faster but fueled by adrenaline. With every breath, the gang weighed their options, and in that split second, Walter's fierce determination ignited something in them. The leader's bravado cracked for the first time, uncertainty crystallizing in his eyes. "We'll see you again, farmer," he spat, but even as he spoke, his resolve melted away. And just like that, they turned and fled into the encroaching darkness, their retreat punctuated by hurried footsteps. The forest swallowed them up, leaving the night once again in silence. Walter released a breath he didn't realize he was holding, the tension in his shoulders finally easing. "We did it, buddy," he murmured to Rex, who returned to his side, panting and proud. But even as a sense of victory washed over him, a gnawing worry lingered in the back of his mind. This wasn't over. He could feel it in his bones. They had paid a price for their retreat, and they would return, angrier and more desperate. Days passed, and Walter fortified his defenses, bolstering fences and checking for weak spots in the barn. Every night he lay awake, listening, waiting for the sound of revving engines or distant laughter that would signal danger creeping back into his life. As news of his confrontation spread through Pine Hollow, community members began to show up more frequently, bringing tools, supplies, and their own stories of near misses with the gang. They gathered around Walter, pledging their support, igniting a flame of camaraderie that burned brightly through the night. "We're all in this together, Walter," said Sarah, a neighbor from up the road, her determination matching his own. The day the gang returned, the atmosphere in Pine Hollow had shifted dramatically. Walter had gathered a small group of neighbors by his side, strategizing under the amber glow of sunset. It was a meeting filled with nervous laughter, but beneath it all was a steely resolve to protect their home. As night began to fall, the distant growl of motorcycles rumbled through the valley, chilling the air. Walter's heart sank, the realization hitting him hard. "They're back," he whispered, adrenaline flooding his veins. His neighbors grew quiet, fear etched on their faces, yet intertwined with determination. They had chosen to stay and fight rather than hide away in fear. With every heartbeat, their bond strengthened, and Walter knew they were prepared. "They think they can take what's rightfully ours," Walter said, raising his voice. With an unlikely army behind him, Walter prepared to face them head-on. The glow of torches flickered in the night, illuminating the path as the gang rode into view, moving in a tight pack, arrogance radiating off their silhouettes. They slowed as they approached, the gang leader scanning the gathered community, now armed not just with pitchforks and shovels but with a fierce spirit. Walter stepped forward, aware of the destiny lying ahead. The leader taunted, but his bravado was backfiring and he could see it in his own eyes. "Enough with the games," Walter said, holding his ground. "You don't belong here. We'll defend this land together." The gang moved forward, but something in the atmosphere shifted. The laughter and jeers faded away, replaced by uncertainty. The The disparity between them was impossible to ignore, not just in numbers but in heart. The leader clenched his jaw, tension evident as the emotions in the air thickened. "You think you can win this?" But Walter held his ground, fueled by every moment he had invested in this farm, this community, and a future he refused to let slip away. "You may think you're tough." In that moment, it was no longer just two opposing forces. It was a clash of ideals, fear versus courage, selfishness versus the desire to protect what was rightfully theirs. Suddenly, from the shadows, Max stepped forward, growling low and fierce, ready to defend against any threat. The gang faltered, taken aback, hesitating in their advance. Walter took the opportunity to rally his neighbors. He shouted, a wave of energy crashing over the group as they stepped forward in unison, united and resolute. The atmosphere crackled with tension, and the gang leader realized they were facing more than just one farmer. They were up against a community, a force of nature bonded by love for their land. The leader yelled, voice trembling slightly, "We'll be back, you hear me?" And just like that, they turned and fled, driven back into the night, their words a hollow echo fading into nothingness. As the victory settled in, cheers erupted around Walter, relief and triumph washing over them. But deep inside him lingered that familiar feeling, the knowledge that this was far from over. The remnants of the gang's threats lingered like specters in the back of his mind. Days turned into weeks, and while life seemed to return to normal in Pine Hollow, Walter kept vigilant. But something shifted. The tension in the air was heavy with more than just uncertainty. Whispers began to spread through the community, rumors of bigger, badder forces moving in, threats that made the gang look like child's play. One evening, while gathered around a bonfire with his neighbors, an unexpected visitor arrived. Tom, the local sheriff. He approached with a serious expression, a sense of urgency hanging in the air. "The gang you faced is just a small piece of a larger problem." "They're part of something bigger," Tom said, looking every bit the authoritative figure as he glanced around, locking eyes with several faces, concern visible in their own. Walter's heart sank. The fear, once a distant threat, was now at their doorstep. He had known there was danger in the shadows, but this was something he couldn't fight alone. The depth of what was coming weighed heavily on him. Walter asked, dread coiling in his stomach. "I can't say for sure, but we have to be prepared," Tom replied. "We need to stand strong together." That evening, as darkness fell, a deeper, more palpable fear settled over Pine Hollow. The togetherness that had blossomed now felt fragile, as if it could shatter at any moment. Walter stood on the porch, heart racing as he processed the words they had just heard. A storm was rising, something deeper than anything he had imagined, and as the stars twinkled overhead, he sensed impending danger brewing in the distance. At that moment, he realized the battle wasn't just for his land anymore. It was for the soul of Pine Hollow. Suddenly, a distant rattle of engines shattered the stillness. Walter turned towards the road, his breath catching in his throat. Was it just the wind, or was this the beginning of the next fight? His heart raced as the low hum of motorcycles neared. They hadn't just returned, they were coming for everything. The reality of danger settled deep within him as he braced himself for the confrontation that would change everything. As headlights illuminated the darkness in blinding bursts, Walter steadied his breath, ready to rally his friends once more. This was it. The moment had arrived. A fight was brewing, and this time, it was about more than just one man defending his farm. It was about a community standing strong against a fierce storm that had come to claim their lives. With every heartbeat echoing a war drum in the silence, Walter knew they had to prepare. They had to move fast. The night was filled with uncertainty, but one thing was clear: fear would not win today. As engines roared to life, Walter stepped forward with a defiance that burned like the flames flickering in the bonfire, not just for his land, but for hope itself. As the shadows drew closer, he understood the stakes had just risen. Barriers would be shattered, friendships tested, and the fight would demand everything they were. And as he faced that approaching darkness, his heart echoed the unwavering call of courage. In the coming storm, would they rise together, or would shattered dreams linger as bitter reminders of what could have been? The suspense electrified the night, and the battle clock ticked louder with every second.